after when we were working on Castle Boulevard, I talked about earlier, I transitioned out of the heavy metal team and wrote the painting guides and did that for about a year. And then at some point after that, I can't remember exactly when it was, I started writing a series of heavy metal masterclass articles for White Dwarf magazine. And that was probably for about 18 months to 2 years. And I think that's, well, it is definitely the most fun I've ever had in my career at that point, because I didn't have a boss. There was no one telling me what to do. People, the studio management at that point, just said, well, just do some great stuff, you know, to make some dioramas for upcoming products, and we'll feature them in the products, and we'll feature them in White Dwarf magazine. And that was the brief, really. So I'd find out, right, you know, talking to the games designers and product teams, you know, what was coming up. So I think, I can't remember exactly, someone will know, and I should know this, the first one that I did, but it might possibly have been the Emperor and Horus diorama. And I'd say that's the one that people are most interested in. That's certainly the one, even to this day, that people always ask me about and gets the most, you know, people who go into Warhammer Worlds, it's on display in the Miniatures Museum, and all of the time I'm being tagged in photographs that people have taken of the Emperor and Horus diorama. So that's, I think, I might be wrong, that was the first of the dioramas I made. And actually the history of that, interestingly, goes back quite a bit further. It goes back right to the time when Adrian Smith, my good friend and incredible artist, created that first black and white image of the Emperor and Horus. And I think that was right at the end of, he didn't move down to Castle Boulevard, so that must have happened in Enfield Chambers. So that must have been around about 1990, 1991, something like that. He created that piece of artwork, and I was, like everyone else, was blown away with it. You know, it was so amazing. And I started at that point, for a personal project for myself, doing conversions of the two miniatures with the aim of making a diorama. Because I'd actually started making dioramas, you know, when we were in Enfield Chambers, jumping backwards in time again. When I first started as a miniature painter, some dioramas had been made by Colin Dixon and Dave Andrews, and there were these box dioramas. It was like about, well, magazine size, about A4 box, probably about no more than 2 inches deep inside. And if you look back through the old Citadel journals and things like that, they were featured in there, and they were really great. And seeing those when I came into the studio, and seeing John Blanche's dioramas that he'd been making, he made this really incredible, like undead, like storming a city diorama, which just absolutely amazed me.
I think that's in Warhammer World as well, I think.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is displayed. It is. You're absolutely right. Yeah. And anyway, so and another thing I've got John to thank for. He gave me my first dioramas to make. You know, when I'd been in the heavy metal team for a few years, and I got one of these boxes to make. So I made. I think the first one I made was, there was two early ones anyway. There was a Space Hulk one. With like, there was like a lift down one side, and then like Terminators. I think there was like Nova Marines and Blood Angels, and then Gene Stealers down the bottom. There was that one, and then the other one I did was actually, I did a diorama that was it was like some orcs, like some orcs and dwarves fighting underground, and some space marines, and that was actually given to Ian Miller, the amazing artist Ian Miller, as a gift. And I talked to him last year, and he still has it. He's still he says in pride of place in his studio. So I was really happy about that. Anyway, I started making dioramas and discovered my love for making dioramas back in the late 80s, and it was something completely different. You know, as a miniature painter, it was very production line in those early days, painting miniatures for you know, articles, adverts, promotion, you know, box covers, things like that. And like I said previously, it was very short deadlines. So be able to make a diorama and do something narrative with those miniatures was brilliant, and I just absolutely loved it, you know. So did a few there, and then so when I was at Games Workshop and Adrian done this incredible piece of artwork, I thought, God, I'd love to make that as a diorama. I'd love to create that scene, you know. Didn't really have an idea how I was going to do it at that point, but I thought the first thing to do was to make the miniatures, and I was in the very enviable position of being able to get hold of any miniatures I wanted to get hold of, you know. I didn't have to buy miniatures to cut a head off, you know. I could, you know, we could get them. They're around the studio. They're all over the place. So I made these 2 conversions of the Emperor and Horus, just in my lunch times and things like that. And they sat in my desk for, a couple of years at least. They're probably more than that. I don't know now. It's so long ago. My memory's a bit sketchy of timelines, but I definitely started working them in Enfield Chambers, and I didn't do the Emperor and Horus diorama until probably 93 or 94 or something like that. So I must have had these conversions for at least 4 years. And I think I'd started painting Horus. I'm pretty sure I've got memories of, you know, started doing that sort of red colour scheme with this like kind of crackling effect on the armour, these like really fine like lines, as if the way I imagine it is if it was made of like a ceramic or something, and it had like cracked and crazed over the surface. And I started that, and again it sat in my drawer. And then when I had this opportunity to make dioramas for projects for White Dwarf, I'm pretty sure that was the first one I did. Someone might prove to me that I'm wrong. This happens all of the time. I have these really strong memories, and then I find out that it's incorrect. But anyway, the Emperor and Horus diorama, I kind of resurrected these old conversions that I'd done, and then finished it, basically, like created the scene. And it's all built out of like, back in those days, God, I sound like such an old man, you had to make everything that you wanted in a diorama, you know. There was not like this massive kind of library of like plastic bits that existed like there is now, that people have kind of cut up and rearranged. And I'm not saying people don't make amazing dioramas now, they do, really incredible. But back then there was nothing. There was a model shop in Nottingham called GD Models, and used to go in there and kind of scour the shelves for anything, you know, plastic card and textured plastic card and plastic rod and, you know, different kind of girder extrusions.
Yeah, all these different elements you can kind of utilise to... Yeah,
absolutely, and kind of make those. In the Emperor and Horus one, I didn't really use any of that kind of stuff, really, so it's all made out of, you know, I think the kind of... I think I made the kind of base for it, just kind of like a, you know, L-shaped base, probably just out of like hardboard or something, or MDF, and then the rest of it is just built out of plastic card. All the frame and all the detailing. There's another modelling material that we had access to when Games Workshop were doing plastic miniatures in those days. They used to sculpt them. Other people have talked about this at length. Sculpt them 3 times bigger, 3-ups they were called. And so any weapons or hard surfaces were made out of this material called Uriel, and it's like a resin that, my understanding is that it's kind of impregnated with wood dust. So it's kind of like, you'd get it in sheets, but it's really great to carve and sand and things like that. So like the dais and the platforms and things like that on the Emperor and Horus diorama were made out of that. And pretty much everything else was plastic card, really. I think I used some kind of like plastic chaos shields on the walls, kind of like really carefully like cut off the design on the shields and put it on the wall, and then sculpted it in, and then holes blown in the wall.
It's on Horus's flagship, isn't it?
It's on the battle barge or whatever it was called. I can't remember exactly. And then those, you know, the, you know, very sort of gothic looking architecture, all taken from Adrian's artwork. You know, I was trying to replicate that as faithfully as I could, really. And then, you know, this window in the background looking down on Earth with a battle raging, and actually the Earth that's through that window, that was actually painted for me by Dave Gallagher. You know, I went and saw Dave and asked him if he'd show me how to do something. It's like, oh, I'll just do it for you. So just like, while I was there, you know, got his paper and pen out, and like sketched out this thing, painted it, and painted this planet, and that's what's in the diorama. So it's not 100% my work.
It's really interesting because at the time, obviously, the lore and the IP, if you will, wasn't as fleshed out as it is nowadays.
Oh, no, nothing like. I mean, no, absolutely. I mean, now it's so detailed. I haven't read all the books and everything, so I don't know it all that well, really. But it's like everything we did in the early days of Games Workshop. They were just ideas that people would come up with. There was spitballing rounds, and then they would run with, little things that were talked about in the original Rogue Trader. Blossomed Rick Priestley and people like that would tell all this stuff way better than I ever could, because other people who did it. But yeah, the Horus heresy and that story was just. I think Adrian's artwork went with a story that I think Bill King wrote. I think I'm right in saying that. And that fleshed out things more, and then it went on from there. But back in the early days, we were just making it up. Really, there were some elements in the diorama that weren't in Adrian's drawing. There's I did this kind of altar thing with skulls and blood and things on it, and a big chaos symbol. In fact, I've got pictures of it in this old folder. If I can find them. This is all my. Here it is. This is the masterclass article I wrote about the Emperor and Horus diorama, and you can see that talks about Indigo. That's Dave Gallagher's painting that he did for me, and this element here is not in Adrian's painting. And there's other bits that I kind of when I was making a diorama, you try and imagine exactly where the camera's going to be, because I was always thinking in terms of how it would photograph and how it would be shown in White Dwarf. So this was kind of a fixed point scene, really, that was trying to replicate Adrian's artwork. So I built it around that, the kind of layers. You can see the diorama I'm working on there. How it would work in a flat photo. So that the chain here, I was trying to create what Adrian's artwork was, and I don't have a picture of Adrian's artwork in here, but that was what I was trying to do. All the dioramas that I went on to make, I was very aware that I was making them for a product. There was another one I did, which is I did a couple of Space Hulk ones, and another one I did that was for the side panel of probably, I don't know, the first Space Hulk boxed game, I think, or was it no, it's the second, must have been the second, because the first one was late 80s, wasn't it? So it would be the second one when we're in Castle Boulevard, and they wanted me to make a diorama that was on the side panel, so I had to make a diorama that was that long and that high. So I did corridor sections and this kind of central room, but I was always creating things with an eye to product, because that's what I was trained to do when I was there, and to make sure. I've talked about before how as a miniature painter I developed my painting style and what went on to become the heavy metal painting style, to work in photographs, and that's where the sort of edge highlighting comes from, to pick out those edges and make sure that it popped in photos, which in those days were kind of pretty dicey reprographic processes, and they're still kind of to this day, they've advanced it on so far, of course it's different now, but really that's where even the modern heavy metal style comes from, the kind of the progression of that was to do something to fulfill the need that you had to make things bright and pop out on the page and photograph well. And I did that with my dioramas too. I was trying to create a scene that would work from primarily tell a story from a fixed perspective, and so I could never make something that was really sort of in the round a diorama that because it just wouldn't work very well. You had to kind of it had to be in some ways an enclosed space. It's why the old-fashioned box dioramas, they did those. It's like a box with a glass front on, and it'd work on a page. If you did it like portrait, that's it. That's a page right there. So I always had that in mind when I was making the dioramas. And like I said before, it's such a fun thing to work on, just getting to create these scenes and work with the game designers on new products, things like when we did the Lizard Man army book, the first one. The Lizard Man was a new race, right? It was a new range that we'd never done before, so the look and feel was not fixed. It was, you know, it was working with Nigel Stillman, who was an absolute legend in those days, you know. And I remember really distinctly working with him on, I was going to do a diorama, and at that point, you know, it's just kind of early on in the cycle, he was just fleshing out the Lizard Man range. You know, he was getting ideas for what it was going to be like, and it was going to have this like Central American, Aztec, Toltec, you know, Olmec sort of feel to the design stuff. And we used to sit and talk about this stuff. And he had created this army. He used to, when he started a new project, Nigel, he would go away and make an army. And just like he was not the best miniature painter in the world, but he did things kind of fast and dirty, if you like. But they were amazing. Like the creativity and how they looked, like that Lizard Man army, God knows where it got all this stuff from, and put all these feathered headdresses and things, and you know, working on that stuff with him was absolute joy. And again, that's another one that's in here. And I think when it comes down to it, it's probably my favourite of all the dioramas I did. This one, the Lustrian diorama. So it was like it was like a conquistador force, like coming in and fighting against these like Central American themed lizard men. And actually these miniatures that I used, these were sculpted by the Perry twins, and I don't think they were ever released. Maybe they were in some form somewhere else, but they were like little sort of conquistador miniatures, you know, and I got masses of them to paint. You can't imagine doing that now. I mean, me doing this diorama and doing this as miniatures that don't exist, that aren't, you know, never been released
in a published.
In White, just a big White Book magazine, in the Army book itself, but it was such, and that's, like I said, I think it's my favourite diorama I ever did, really, and it was brilliant fun to work on, and working with the Perry twins, painting these miniatures that they'd made, and working with Nigel on the sort of backgrounds and all the sort of like the little glyphs. You know, I made all of these like sculpted these like little glyphs that they were coming up with ideas for what they'd mean, and then they were sent off to the factory and be cast. And I repeated them on the diorama to make the wall panels and things. And then I think actually they ended up selling those. I think back in those days, I think you could buy these little terrain pieces. It was brilliant fun. It was such a great thing to be working on, you know. When I was doing it, when I look back now, I think it was only 18 months or maximum 2 years that I was doing that job. But it was so fun. So I did the Emperor and Horus, I did the Lizard Man one, I did a Wood Elves one, which was great, fighting against the Lishmaster. And like this cavalry charge, and again I was getting these miniatures that had just been created. So Gary Morley was doing the new Wood Elves range at that point, and Trish Morrison had I think it's Trish, pretty sure, you have to ask her, but I think she was the one who did the horse, the plastic horse, and got those the Glade Riders, and this kind of cavalry charge of those coming out of the woods and into this sort of like tomb, and all these skeletons coming down, very much influenced by Ray Harryhausen. And you know, Gary Morley had I remember really well, like just in time to get my diorama finished. I got the little, I can't remember what they were called though, like little this kind of scout miniatures for the Wood Elves. They had these like cloaks on that were covered in leaves and the kind of masked faces. I remember I got those right at the last minute. You know, just got masters of those, managed to paint one or two that were kind of popped up in the top of the scene. But they were just brilliant projects to work on, really good. So there's that one, and then the Warhammer Quest one was the last one that I did. And in some ways, that was the hardest one to do, actually. It kind of broke me a little bit making that diorama.
Jesus.
Because it was, I went back and decided to kind of go back to the box diorama, like the very early ones that we used to make. I thought it was kind of, I wanted to do something really retro, because the whole game was really retro, really, you know, the sort of artwork and everything.
Yeah.
Felt sort of like earlier.
Very early Dungeons and Dragons-esque almost.
Yeah, absolutely. And I wanted to capture that. And we used to play, actually. I was part of a lunchtime game of playing Warhammer Quest with Andy Jones, who ran that project. I think he wrote the game. I may be wrong on that, but I'm pretty sure. Anyway, he ran the whole thing, and he sort of DM'd this lunchtime Warhammer Quest game, and myself, and Richard Wright, who painted all of the floor plans for that game, which were really fantastic, and a few other people. And so I really wanted to make a diorama that sort of like captured the feel of playing the game, and it's sort of like not particularly serious, funny, and kind of like it was all a bit sort of comic booky, really. Some of the sculpts felt, they had a sense of humour to them. That was really nice.
You could almost see it as like the poster for like a B movie kind of thing or something like that.
Yeah, it was so fun to work on. That's what I wanted to really kind of create in that diorama. And so each of the rooms, you look at the original Warhammer Quest. Each of the rooms, like I said before, the artwork was by Richard Wright. This beautifully painted floor plans. It's so lovely. And they're all in sort of bright colours, all the different rooms, and that's what I did in the diorama. I made each of the rooms sort of like a different kind of colour theme. And the thing that was hard about it is that I did a box diorama, and I thought, well, I just don't want to be limited by this really narrow space anymore. So I made it deeper. This box made that's probably about 4 inches, maybe something like that. It's in the Warhammer Museum. You can see it. And I thought, well, I'm going to try and increase that. I'm going to do forced perspective. I'm going to do, so it looks like it's deeper. I'll do some kind of like trickery to do that, and that was so hard. Mm-hmm. And once I'd made that decision that everything was going to be in forced perspective, everything I made that was going in that scene, all of the like on the floor. All of everything had to go to like a vanishing point, and then it was really, it's not that tough. It's not it's not like coal mining or anything. Let's face it. It was really fun, but like coming in, I remember distinctly.
You had to think a lot more.
Yeah, I had to use my brain, which was not always easy. Make this scene that kind of fooled the eye, so it looked like it was like rooms going back into the distance and corridors and things, and it took me longer than any of the other dioramas for sure. I think it took me at least 2 months, maybe 3. And I just remember like every day like coming in and like cutting out like floor tiles with forced perspective on them and making them fit in and work in the same, but I, in retrospect, I was glad to finish that one. When I was done with that, I was really happy that it was done. But in retrospect, to look at it now and actually really love it. I really like it. It's really fun, and it really achieves what I wanted to do, was to have this like fun kind of like dungeon bash, so the characters are coming in, they're going through these different rooms, and they're in all these different scrapes of these evil characters, and it was really fun to do, and that whole 18 months, 2 years that I worked just doing those was brilliant fun. I feel really privileged to do that, and it's so lovely that those dioramas still exist, and they're in the Warhammer World Museum.
Loved by a lot of fans as well.
Yeah, and I'm really, people, when I was down there for Golden Demon a couple of years ago now, and I went in and I saw all those old dioramas, it was really quite emotional, really, because I've not seen them for a long. I've not seen them since I'd left Games Workshop in the late 90s, and it was just like being in a time machine. It's like being transported back, and I can imagine, just remember exactly, sitting in my little office. I shared an office in those days with American guy called Owen Branham, who's still at Games Workshop. Still works, I think he runs Forge World, or is helping Forge World, and he was brought over from America, and he was making terrain, so he was making war games terrain for the studio, for those like big sort of like battle reports and things like that, and sort of diorama type shots. He was making that, so we shared a little office. Making stuff, right? He was making his terrain, I was making my dioramas, and it was really brilliant fun. Such a happy time there, and really creative. And I'd love to come back to making more dioramas myself one day. And I have all sorts of, in my studio here, I have all sorts of projects I want to plan. I have all these like clock cases that I bought that are lying around that I want to make dioramas inside of, and I've got all sorts of plans that I'd like to do, and hopefully one day now I'm painting again and creating again, I'll get a chance to do, and I'll get to revisit that stuff again one day.